What if I told you that the Yorkshire accent you might find charming, the fish and chips you enjoy, and even the labor laws protecting workers today all emerged from one rebellious county? For 2,000 years, Yorkshire has refused to bow to anyone, from Roman emperors to English kings, from industrial barons to Margaret Thatcher herself. This defiance didn't just shape a region. It forged the identity of modern Britain. How did England's largest county become its most fiercely independent? Join me as we journey through 2 millennia of Vikings and wool merchants, medieval battles and mill workers, coal miners, and cultural revolutionaries who made Yorkshire the rebel heart of a nation. In the autumn of 71 AD, the 9th Legion Hispana marched north through hostile territory. Their destination a strategic confluence where the rivers Ouse and Foss met. The Romans had conquered southern Britain 3 decades earlier, but the fierce Brigantes tribe still controlled these northern lands, their hill forts dotting the Pennine landscape. The legion's commander, Quintus Petilius Cerealis, understood that controlling the north required more than temporary camps. He needed a permanent fortress, a statement in stone that Rome had come to stay. The site they chose was masterful. Elevated ground provided clear sight lines across the surrounding floodplain, while the rivers offered both natural defense and vital transportation routes. Within months, legionaries transformed the wilderness into Eboracum, a 50-acre fortress constructed with the precision that made Rome's military machine unstoppable. Wooden palisades went up first, protecting the soldiers as they dug defensive ditches and laid out the grid pattern that would define the settlement for centuries. This was not merely a fort, it was the blueprint for a city. By the turn of the 2nd century, Eboracum had undergone a dramatic metamorphosis. The original timber buildings gave way to structures of dressed stone, their limestone blocks quarried from sites along the Magnesian belt. The legionary fortress boasted barracks for 5,000 men, granaries that could withstand a year-long siege, and a principia, headquarters building, whose basilica rivaled structures in Rome itself. Beneath the streets, engineers constructed an elaborate hippocaust system, channeling heated air through hollow floors to warm the bathhouse complex where soldiers could wash away the grime of Britain's northern frontier. The bathhouse became more than a place of cleanliness. It served as a social hub where men from across the empire gathered, their conversations a babel of Latin, Celtic, and Germanic tongues. Inscriptions discovered centuries later revealed the diversity of Eboracum's garrison, soldiers from Spain, Gaul, Germania, and as far as Syria. They brought their gods with them, erecting temples to Mithras, Serapis, and native deities that the Romans pragmatically absorbed into their pantheon. In 119, Emperor Hadrian visited Eboracum during his tour of Britain's defenses, and the city's importance crystallized. When Rome divided Britannia into 2 provinces around the year 197, Eboracum became capital of Britannia Inferior, the lower province that encompassed everything from the Humber to Hadrian's Wall. The fortress town now wielded administrative authority over a territory larger than many European nations. Trade transformed the settlement's character. Merchants established a civilian town, a Canabai, outside the fortress walls where shops sold everything from Gaulish pottery to Spanish olive oil. Warehouses lined the riverfront, storing goods that traveled the Ouse to the Humber and across the North Sea. Yorkshire wool, lead from the Pennines, and jet from Whitby's cliffs flowed outward, while wine, glassware, and luxury goods flowed in. The roads Romans built, radiating from Eboracum like spokes on a wheel, stitched Yorkshire into an empire that stretched from Scotland to the Sahara. By the early 3rd century, Eboracum had evolved into something unprecedented in northern Britain, a true Roman city where military might, political power, and commercial enterprise converged. But the greatest chapter in its story was yet to come, when an emperor would arrive seeking not just to visit, but to conquer the unconquerable north. In February of 211, the most powerful man in the world lay dying in York. Emperor Septimius Severus, who had ruled Rome for 18 years and commanded legions from Britain to Mesopotamia, found himself confined to the praetorium within Eboracum's fortress, his body ravaged by illness, his grand ambitions crumbling like the northern frontier he had come to secure. Severus had arrived in Britain 3 years earlier with an audacious goal: the complete conquest of Caledonia, the wild lands beyond Hadrian's Wall that had humiliated Roman arms for over a century. He brought with him not just legions, but his entire imperial court, transforming Eboracum into Rome's de facto capital. His wife Julia Domna held audiences in Yorkshire, while his sons Caracalla and Gaeta squabbled over precedence in rooms where northern chieftains once plotted rebellion. The emperor launched 2 massive campaigns into Scotland, pushing Roman power further north than it had reached since the days of Agricola. Legionaries rebuilt the Antonine Wall, constructed new forts, and drove deep into Highland territory. Yet the Caledonians refused pitched battle, instead waging guerrilla warfare that bled Roman columns in ambush after ambush. Severus's frustration grew with each inconclusive engagement, his health deteriorating in Britain's damp climate. By 211, it was clear the conquest would never materialize. As Severus lay dying, he reportedly gave his sons a final piece of advice: enrich the soldiers and despise everyone else. On the 4th of February, the emperor who had reshaped Rome's political landscape breathed his last in Yorkshire soil. His body was cremated on a great pyre outside Eboracum's walls, the smoke visible for miles across the Vale of York. His son Caracalla immediately abandoned his father's Scottish ambitions. Within months, he withdrew Roman forces south of Hadrian's Wall and negotiated treaties with the Caledonian tribes. The dream of total British conquest died with Severus, yet Caracalla's pragmatism brought something more valuable: stability. Yorkshire flourished as military tensions eased and resources once devoted to endless campaigns flowed instead into civilian development. The decades following Severus's death marked Eboracum's golden age. The civilian settlement sprawled beyond its original boundaries, covering over 100 acres. Stone buildings replaced timber structures throughout the Canabi, their tiled roofs and painted plaster facades transforming the frontier town into a proper provincial city. Wealthy merchants built townhouses with mosaic floors depicting scenes from classical mythology, while workshops produced everything from fine metalwork to intricate jet jewelry. The fortress itself underwent continuous enhancement. Engineers installed sophisticated water systems, piping fresh spring water through lead pipes to fountains scattered throughout the settlement. The bathhouse complex expanded, adding new rooms for different temperature gradients and exercise. A massive granary testified to Eboracum's role as the logistical hub for the entire northern frontier. Then, on the 25th of July, 306, history turned once again on Yorkshire soil. Emperor Constantius Chlorus, who had come to Britain to campaign against the Picts, died in Eboracum just as Severus had 95 years earlier. But this imperial death would reshape not just Britain, but the entire course of Western civilization. In the fortress at York, the legions proclaimed Constantius's son as their new emperor. Constantine, later called the Great, began his reign in Yorkshire. From this northern stronghold, he would march south to claim the entire Roman Empire, legalize Christianity, found Constantinople, and forge the bridge between ancient and medieval worlds. The teenager elevated to purple in Eboracum would become one of history's most transformative figures. Few cities could claim to be the birthplace of two imperial dynasties, the deathbed of emperors, and a capital where world-changing decisions echoed through centuries. Yet as Constantine departed York to claim his destiny, the city's own fate hung in precarious balance. The empire he inherited was fragmenting, and Yorkshire's prosperity rested on Roman order that was beginning to crack. The 4th century brought a different kind of twilight to Yorkshire. After Constantine marched south from Eboracum in 306, the fortress that had crowned 2 emperors became increasingly peripheral to imperial concerns. Rome's attention turned eastward, toward Constantinople, Constantine's gleaming new capital on the Bosporus. Britain, once a prize worth emperors' lives, became a distant province requiring expensive defense for diminishing returns. The signs of decline emerged gradually. Imperial officials visited less frequently. Coin shipments to pay the garrison arrived irregularly, forcing commanders to rely on local requisitions that strained relationships with civilian populations. Maintenance of roads and public buildings slowed as resources dried up. By mid-century, some of the finest townhouses in Eboracum's civilian settlement stood abandoned, their mosaic floors gathering dust. Yet the real threat came from beyond the frontiers. Hadrian's Wall, that monumental statement of Roman permanence, faced mounting pressure from Pictish tribes to the north. These weren't the occasional raids Yorkshire had weathered for generations. The Picts came in coordinated waves, probing for weakness, testing the resolve of undermanned garrison forces. In 367, disaster struck. The Great Conspiracy, as chroniclers later called it, saw Picts, Scots, and Saxons launch simultaneous attacks on Roman Britain. The northern defenses collapsed. Eboracum itself may have faced siege. Rome dispatched Count Theodosius to restore order, and restore it he did, but the rescue came at a cost. The reconstructed frontier was meaner, stripped of the comfortable certainties that had defined 3 centuries of Roman occupation. Watchtowers along the wall now scanned horizons with anxious eyes. Then came new raiders from across the North Sea. Saxon longships, sleek and predatory, began appearing along Yorkshire's eastern coast. Unlike the Picts who sought plunder and withdrew, the Saxons seemed to be exploring, testing, searching for something more permanent. Coastal signal stations sprang up to warn of their approach, desperate attempts to maintain security along an impossibly long coastline. By the opening years of the 5th century, the end was unmistakable. In 410, with Rome itself besieged by Visigoths, Emperor Honorius sent his famous rescript to the British provinces: "Defend yourselves." The legions wouldn't be coming back. What did withdrawal actually mean for Eboracum? The garrison didn't simply march away overnight. Instead, Roman military presence dissolved gradually, like morning mist burning off the Ouse. Soldiers stopped receiving pay from Rome. Some returned to Italy with their commanders. Others, with British wives and Yorkshire-born children, simply stayed, becoming farmers and craftsmen. The fortress that had housed legionaries for 3 centuries fell silent. Urban life proved impossible without Roman administration. The aqueducts required constant maintenance. The bathhouses needed fuel and expertise. The market economy depended on coin and long-distance trade networks. One by one, these systems failed. Eboracum's stone buildings became quarries for humbler structures. The Forum, where merchants once haggled over goods from across the empire, gradually emptied. Within a generation, sheep grazed where emperors had died. Yorkshire was entering its darkest age, waiting for new peoples to write the next chapter of its long, turbulent story. The newcomers arrived not as conquerors, but as invited guests, or so the story goes. In the power vacuum following Rome's departure, British warlords sought mercenaries to help defend against Pictish raids. They looked across the North Sea to the Germanic tribes, the Angles and Saxons, offering land in exchange for military service. It was an arrangement that would reshape Yorkshire forever. By the middle of the 6th century, these invited warriors had become masters. The Angles, originating from what is now Denmark and northern Germany, established their dominion over Yorkshire and the lands beyond. They called their new kingdom Northumbria, the land north of the Humber. What had been the northern frontier of Roman Britain became the heartland of England's most powerful early medieval kingdom. The transformation was total. Latin gave way to the Germanic tongue that would become English. British place names vanished beneath Anglian alternatives. Christianity retreated to the western hills as the newcomers worshipped Woden and Thor. For a century, Yorkshire belonged to the pagan gods. Then came Edwin, the warrior king who would change everything. Ascending Northumbria's throne in 616, Edwin built an empire stretching from the Firth of Forth to the Midlands. His power was such, the chronicler Bede later wrote, that a woman with a newborn child could walk from sea to sea without fear. But Edwin's greatest legacy wasn't military prowess. In 627, in a small wooden church in York, Edwin accepted baptism. His conversion, influenced by his Christian wife Ethelberga and the Roman missionary Paulinus, brought Northumbria into Christendom's fold. Yet conflict immediately emerged between two competing Christian traditions. Roman Christianity, organized and hierarchical, clashed with Celtic Christianity, mystical and individualistic, over questions as fundamental as how to calculate Easter's date. The crisis came to a head in 664 at the Synod of Whitby. There, in a monastery perched on Yorkshire's windswept coast, representatives of both traditions argued their cases before King Oswio. The decision went to Rome. Northumbria would follow continental practice, aligning itself with European Christianity rather than Celtic tradition. It seems a small matter now, a technicality about calendars. But the choice integrated Northumbria into the wider Christian world, opening channels for ideas, scholarship, and cultural exchange. What followed was Yorkshire's first golden age. Monasteries became centers of learning unmatched anywhere in Western Europe. At York, a cathedral school emerged that would produce one of the medieval world's finest minds. Alcuin, born around 735, transformed York School into a beacon of scholarship. His library contained volumes on grammar, rhetoric, mathematics, astronomy, and theology. Students traveled from across Britain and the continent to study there. When Charlemagne, Emperor of the Franks, sought someone to lead his educational reforms, he chose The Yorkshire scholar became the architect of the Carolingian Renaissance carrying knowledge preserved in northern England to the heart of continental Europe. York had become what Rome once was, a place where civilization itself was nurtured and transmitted. The Lindisfarne Gospels, illuminated in nearby Northumbria, demonstrated the artistic heights this culture achieved. Intricate interlacing patterns merged Germanic, Celtic, and Mediterranean influences into something entirely new. These weren't barbarous backwaters. This was sophistication rivaling anything Constantinople could offer. But prosperity attracts predators. Across the North Sea, new raiders watched Yorkshire's wealthy monasteries with hungry eyes. The Vikings were coming. The storm broke on a June morning in 793. At Lindisfarne, monks performing their morning offices had no warning before the longships appeared. The raiders moved with practiced efficiency, smashing through the monastery's wooden doors, seizing chalices and reliquaries, slaughtering those who resisted. Some monks they killed outright. Others they dragged to the ships as slaves. The Church of St. Cuthbert, one of northern England's holiest sites, was left burning. News of the attack rippled across Christendom like a shockwave. Alcuin, still at Charlemagne's court, wrote in anguish to the Northumbrian king. "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race," he lamented. The heathens poured out the blood of saints around the altar and trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God like dung in the streets. For a civilization that had known relative peace for generations, the violence was incomprehensible. But Lindisfarne was merely the beginning. The Vikings, Norsemen from Scandinavia's fjords and coasts, had discovered that Britain's monasteries offered rich plunder with minimal defense. These weren't military installations but communities of prayer, their wealth displayed openly in service to God. Gold crucifixes, illuminated manuscripts bound in silver, jeweled reliquaries containing saints' bones. All unguarded, all vulnerable. Yorkshire's coastal monasteries fell one after another. Jarrow, where Bede had written his histories, suffered devastation. Whitby, site of the famous synod, endured repeated attacks. The raiders came in summer, when calm seas made navigation easier, striking fast before melting away across the waves. Coastal communities learned to dread the sight of square sails on the horizon. Initially, these were hit-and-run raids. The Vikings sought portable wealth, not territory. They arrived, attacked, and departed within days. But gradually, the pattern changed. By the 850s, some raiders began overwintering in Britain rather than returning to Scandinavia. They were no longer just raiders. They were becoming invaders. The crisis reached its peak in 865 when the Great Heathen Army landed on England's eastern shores. This was no raiding party but a coalition of Viking forces unlike anything Britain had faced. Led by the sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, including Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan, the army numbered in thousands. They brought horses, weapons, and ambitions far beyond simple plunder. They intended to conquer. Northumbria, once England's mightiest kingdom, had weakened considerably. Internal divisions plagued the royal family. Two rivals, Osbert and El, competed for the throne while their kingdom fractured. The Viking leadership recognized opportunity. In 866, the Great Heathen Army marched on York. The city's Roman walls still stood, imposing barriers that had defended the settlement for centuries. But walls require determined defenders, and Northumbria's divided leadership couldn't muster effective resistance. The Vikings took York on November 1st, 866, establishing themselves within its ancient fortifications. Osbert and Al finally united against the common threat, assembling a Northumbrian army to reclaim their capital. On March 21st, 867, they attacked. The battle was brief and catastrophic. Both Northumbrian kings fell, cut down in the fighting. Their army shattered. The Kingdom of Northumbria, which had ruled Yorkshire for 3 centuries, producing scholars like Alcuin and monuments like the Lindisfarne Gospels, effectively ceased to exist. York became Jorvik, a Viking stronghold. The conquerors installed a puppet king to maintain appearances, but real power rested with Viking jarls. Yorkshire, the heartland of Anglo-Saxon learning and Christian civilization, had fallen to pagan warriors from across the sea. Yet, this conquest would prove stranger than anyone imagined. The Vikings hadn't simply destroyed what they found. They were about to build something entirely new. The transformation happened quickly. Within a generation of conquest, Jorvik became something its previous inhabitants would scarcely recognize: a thriving commercial center connecting Scandinavia to the wider world. The Vikings understood trade in ways the Anglo-Saxons had not. Where York had been primarily an administrative and religious center, Jorvik became a marketplace. Ships from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden arrived carrying furs, walrus ivory, and amber. They departed laden with English wool, metalwork, and slaves. The city's position, accessible via the River Ouse yet protected inland, made it perfect for commerce. Archaeological evidence from Coppergate, the street of the cupmakers, reveals the scale of this economic explosion. Workshops lined the narrow lanes, their craftsmen producing goods for markets stretching from Dublin to Baghdad. Leatherworkers stitched shoes using techniques imported from Scandinavia. Jewelers crafted intricate brooches in styles blending Norse and Anglo-Saxon traditions. Woodworkers turned bowls on pole lathes, their products shipped across the Viking world. The smell must have been overwhelming. Tanneries processing animal hides produced stenches that drove residents to cluster workshops in specific quarters. Metalworkers hammered iron and bronze, sparks flying in darkened forges. Fish markets sold catches from the North Sea. Dung and refuse piled in streets, yet somehow the city thrived, its population swelling past 10,000. Meanwhile, Viking settlers spread across Yorkshire's countryside, fundamentally reshaping the landscape. The evidence remains visible in place names ending in by meaning farm or settlement. Whitby, Grimsby, Derby. Thorpe, meaning village. Gate, not referring to entrances but to streets from the Norse gata. Even today, Yorkshire's map reads like a Viking census. These settlers brought different farming practices. They cleared forests for new fields, introduced Scandinavian crops, and established estates that would persist for centuries. Unlike the raiders who had terrorized coastal monasteries, many of these colonists arrived as families. They married local women, adopted Christianity over time, and gradually merged with the Anglo-Saxon population they had conquered. The legal framework governing this settlement was the Danelaw, established through treaties in the late 800s. This recognized Viking control over northern and eastern England while acknowledging Anglo-Saxon rule elsewhere. Within the Danelaw, Norse law prevailed. Courts operated on Scandinavian principles. Land was measured in carucates rather than hides. Society organized itself along Viking lines, with jarls commanding loyalty from freeman farmers. Yet the Vikings proved surprisingly adaptable to local conditions. At Jorvik, they struck coins bearing Christian symbols alongside Norse designs. They permitted churches to operate, eventually embracing Christianity themselves. Viking kings like Guthfrith, who ruled in the early 1000s, styled themselves in both Norse and English traditions, understanding that effective governance required accommodation. The city became renowned for its craftsman's skill. Jorvik workshops produced the finest metalwork in Northern Europe. Their techniques, combining Scandinavian artistry with access to English raw materials, created distinctive styles. Silver pennies minted at Jorvik circulated from Iceland to Constantinople. Merchants in distant markets recognized the city's mark. This prosperity attracted attention. To the south, the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex watched Yorkshire's transformation with concern and ambition. The Danelaw represented not just lost territory, but a rival civilization thriving on English soil. The uneasy peace between Viking North and Saxon South could not last forever. In 927, Edward the Elder's son Athelstan marched north with an army determined to bring Yorkshire back under English rule. The Viking century in Jorvik was approaching its end, though the cultural transformation it had wrought would prove permanent. The gates of Jorvik opened without a fight. In 927, when Athelstan's army appeared outside the city walls, the Viking leadership chose survival over defiance. The last Norse king, Guthfrith, had died the previous year, leaving a power vacuum that Athelstan exploited with ruthless efficiency. This was no ordinary English king. Athelstan, grandson of Alfred the Great, harbored ambitions beyond merely recovering lost territory. He envisioned himself as ruler of all Britain, a title no monarch had legitimately claimed. York's submission represented a crucial step toward that goal. The city that had defied English control for 6 decades now bent the knee, its Norse elite grudgingly swearing oaths of loyalty. But Viking Yorkshire would not submit quietly. The Norse diaspora, stretching from Dublin to the Scottish Highlands, watched with alarm as their most prosperous English settlement fell under Saxon control. In Dublin, a Norwegian prince named Olaf Guthfrithson prepared to reclaim his father's lost kingdom. 10 years after Athelstan's conquest, the crisis erupted. Olaf sailed from Ireland with a fleet carrying thousands of warriors, forming an alliance that should have terrified any English king. The Scots under Constantine, the Strathclyde Britons, and Viking forces from across the Irish Sea united against Athelstan's growing power. They understood what his victory meant: the end of independent Viking kingdoms in Britain. The armies met at Brunanburh in 937, somewhere in northern England, the exact location lost to history. Contemporary accounts describe a slaughter unprecedented in living memory. Anglo-Saxon chroniclers wrote of the battlefield running red, of noblemen falling like autumn leaves, of ravens and eagles feasting on the dead. Athelstan won decisively. The Allied forces shattered, their leaders fleeing back to their territories. Olaf escaped to Dublin, his dreams of reclaiming Jorvik crushed. Yet Athelstan's triumph proved temporary. He died in 939, and within 2 years, Olaf had returned to claim York once more. For the next decade, Yorkshire became a prize contested between English kings and Viking adventurers. The throne of Jorvik changed hands repeatedly, each succession marked by violence and intrigue. Then in 947, a figure emerged who embodied Viking ambition in its final, desperate form. Eric Bloodaxe earned his nickname through fratricide, murdering brothers to secure Norway's throne before his own people expelled him. Driven from Scandinavia, he arrived in York as a king without a kingdom, a warrior whose reputation preceded him like a bloodstained banner. The Norse population of Yorkshire, tired of English domination, embraced him as their champion. His reign lurched between exile and restoration. Twice the English drove him from York. Twice he fought his way back. But England's new king, Edred, possessed his predecessor's determination. In 954, Eric made his final stand. Accounts vary on the details. Some chronicles place his death at Stainmore, ambushed while crossing the Pennines. Others suggest betrayal by his own followers. What remains certain is the result. Eric Bloodaxe died in battle, the last Viking king of Yorkshire. With his death, the Norse dream of an independent Jorvik ended forever. Yorkshire would remain English, though the Viking legacy etched into its landscape, language, and character would endure for centuries to come. The autumn morning of September 25th, 1066, dawned clear over the fields of Stamford Bridge. Harold Godwinson's army, battle-weary from a forced march of nearly 200 miles in 4 days, surveyed the Viking encampment across the River Derwent. Harald Hardrada of Norway, perhaps the most feared warrior in Christendom, had come to claim England's crown. With him stood Harold's own brother, Tostig, driven by ambition and spite to betray his homeland. The Vikings never anticipated an English army appearing so quickly. Many had left their armor at the ships, 20 miles distant, expecting no resistance for days. What followed became legend. A lone Norse giant held the bridge against the entire English army, cutting down 40 men before someone floated beneath the span and thrust a spear upward through the wooden planks. Once the bridge fell, the battle turned to slaughter. Harald Hardrada died there, as did Tostig. Of the 300 ships that brought the Norwegian army to Yorkshire, barely 24 sailed home. Harold Godwinson had secured the most complete victory of his brief reign. Yet fate allowed him no time to savor it. Within days, news arrived that William of Normandy had landed on England's southern coast. The disaster at Hastings 3 weeks later left Yorkshire leaderless but not subdued. Norman rule seemed distant at first, concentrated in the south. But William understood that England could never be truly conquered while Yorkshire's wealth and warrior tradition remained intact. When Edgar Atheling, the last Anglo-Saxon claimant to England's throne, fled north and received Yorkshire's support, William recognized the threat. In 1068, the first major rebellion erupted. Yorkshire rose alongside Northumbria, killing William's appointed Earl in Durham. The king marched north with terrifying speed, crushing resistance and building castles to dominate the landscape. York received 2 fortifications, their timber towers casting shadows over streets where Vikings had once ruled. But Yorkshire's spirit proved difficult to break. In 1069, a Danish fleet appeared in the Humber, sent by King Sweyn Estridsson to exploit England's instability. The sight of dragon-prowed longships stirred ancestral memories. Yorkshire's population, still heavily Scandinavian in blood and culture, saw not invaders but liberators. The combined Anglo-Danish force stormed York, overwhelming the Norman garrison and burning both castles to the ground. For weeks, it seemed the conquest might unravel entirely. Then William did something unprecedented in medieval warfare. He decided to destroy Yorkshire itself. The campaign that followed earned its terrible name, the Harrying of the North. Throughout the winter of 1069 to 1070, Norman forces systematically devastated the region. They burned villages, slaughtered livestock, destroyed grain stores, and salted fields. Agricultural tools, essential for survival, were smashed or stolen. The goal was not military victory, but annihilation of Yorkshire's capacity to resist. Contemporary chroniclers, even those sympathetic to Norman rule, described the horror in stark terms. Orderic Vitalis, writing decades later, claimed William confessed on his deathbed to murdering over 100,000 people through deliberate starvation. While medieval numbers often exaggerated, archaeological evidence supports the campaign's devastating scope. The Domesday book, compiled in 1086, recorded the aftermath. Page after page listed Yorkshire estates as waste, their value reduced to nothing. Entire settlements had vanished. Where prosperous villages once stood, surveyors found only emptiness. Some estimates suggest over 60% of Yorkshire's pre-conquest population died or fled. The region would take generations to recover. Yet even this catastrophe could not entirely crush Yorkshire's distinctive character. The survivors, hardened by suffering, would rebuild. The mixture of Anglo-Saxon resilience and Viking stubbornness, forged over centuries, had endured its darkest test. William had conquered Yorkshire through terror. But the price paid by both conqueror and conquered would echo through English history, creating wounds that time alone could never fully heal. The devastation demanded reconstruction, but what emerged was not a restoration of what had been lost. Instead, Yorkshire became a canvas for Norman ambition, transformed through stone and religious fervor into something entirely new. William's pacification required permanence. Wooden fortifications that had burned in York's rebellion gave way to stone strongholds designed to dominate forever. York Castle rose on its mound above the Ouse, its walls thick enough to withstand any siege. But the true masterpiece appeared in Swaledale, where Alan Rufus of Brittany began constructing Richmond Castle in 1071. Perched on a cliff above the River Swale, its great tower soared 100 feet high, visible for miles across the dales. This was architecture as political statement, Norman power made manifest in limestone and mortar. Castles multiplied across Yorkshire's landscape like a rash of stone. Skipton, Pontefract, Conisbrough, each commanding strategic valleys and river crossings. They served dual purposes: military garrisons to suppress rebellion and administrative centers to extract wealth from the recovering countryside. The message was unmistakable. Norman rule had arrived permanently. Yet stone alone could not legitimize conquest. William and his successors understood that divine approval mattered in medieval Europe. The answer lay in Yorkshire's greatest building project, the reconstruction of York Minster. The Anglo-Saxon cathedral, damaged during the rebellions, was deemed insufficient for Norman ambitions. In 1080, Archbishop Thomas of Bayeux laid the first stones of a new structure that would dwarf anything Yorkshire had seen. Built in the Romanesque style, with rounded arches and massive pillars, it announced that even God had accepted Norman authority. The transformation intensified under Henry I. After decades of devastation, Yorkshire's land lay underused, its population still recovering. The solution arrived from Burgundy in 1132 when 13 Benedictine monks, led by the austere Richard of Fountains, established an abbey in the Skell Valley. These were Cistercians, a reformed order seeking wilderness and isolation for pure devotion. They found both in Yorkshire. Within decades, Fountains Abbey became one of medieval Europe's wealthiest monasteries. The Cistercians proved genius at transforming marginal land into profit. Where scattered survivors struggled, organized monastic communities thrived. They drained marshes, cleared forests, and established vast sheep runs across the Pennine moorlands. Yorkshire's wool, produced in unprecedented quantities, began flowing to Flemish looms, generating immense wealth. Other Cistercian foundations followed rapidly. Revolux Abbey in Rydale, Byland in the shadow of the Hambleton Hills, Kirkstall near Leeds. Each claimed thousands of acres, reorganizing Yorkshire's landscape around religious devotion and economic efficiency. The abbeys employed lay brothers by the hundreds, transforming monastic houses into industrial enterprises cloaked in piety. These white monks, as they were called for their undyed wool habits, left marks still visible today. They built networks of granges, outlying farms managed as satellites of the mother house. They constructed roads, bridges, and water systems. The ruins of Fountains Abbey, even now, display engineering sophistication that rivals military architecture. Soaring Gothic arches, complex drainage systems, heated dormitories. These monks lived simply but built magnificently. By 1190, Yorkshire bore little resemblance to the landscape Harold Hardrada had marched through barely a century before. Norman castles commanded every horizon. Church towers punctuated valley floors. Sheep grazed where Viking longhouses once stood. The survivors of the harrying had rebuilt, but they rebuilt in a new image. The conquest had succeeded not merely through violence but through transformation. Stone by stone, prayer by prayer, Yorkshire was being remade as a jewel of Norman England. The Cistercian monks who had claimed Yorkshire's wilderness for prayer discovered an unexpected blessing. Their sheep produced exceptional wool. By 1200, what began as monastic self-sufficiency had evolved into industrial-scale production that would transform Yorkshire into medieval Europe's economic powerhouse. The white monks mastered economies of scale unknown in secular agriculture. Fountains Abbey alone maintained flocks exceeding 15,000 sheep across the Pennine moorlands. Revolux commanded similar numbers in the North York moors. These weren't scattered peasant holdings but organized enterprises with standardized breeding, systematic shearing, and coordinated marketing. Yorkshire wool, prized for its length and strength, became the raw material clothing half of Europe. Flemish merchants arrived in York each summer, their purses heavy with continental silver. They purchased entire abbey clips years in advance, guaranteeing income that funded ever more ambitious building projects. The Gothic reconstruction of York Minster, begun in 1220, relied heavily on wool revenues. So did the spectacular refectories and chapter houses rising at Cistercian abbeys across the county. Wool built everything. But the monks faced unexpected competition. In Yorkshire's growing towns, secular merchants recognized opportunity. York's guilds, particularly the powerful mercers and merchants adventurers, demanded their share of the profitable trade. Unlike the abbeys, which sold raw fleeces, urban entrepreneurs invested in finishing. Wool became cloth, vastly increasing its value. The transformation began in market towns dotting the Pennine slopes. Bradford, Halifax, Wakefield, Leeds. Water-powered fulling mills appeared along Pennine streams in the early 1300s, mechanizing the laborious process of cleaning and thickening woven cloth. What once required days of human trampling now took hours with wooden hammers powered by river current. Yorkshire cloth, stamped with guild marks guaranteeing quality, entered markets from Novgorod to Constantinople. Fortunes accumulated rapidly. Merchant families in York built timber-framed mansions along the Shambles and Stonegate, their wealth rivaling minor nobility. They endowed hospitals, maintained bridges, and most visibly rebuilt parish churches in spectacular fashion. The great wool churches of the Dales rose during the 1400s, monuments to mercantile piety and pride. Consider Holy Trinity in Middleham or St. Oswald in Methley. Their soaring perpendicular towers, intricate stone tracery, and expansive clerestory windows required investments far beyond normal parish resources. Wool merchants funded them, ensuring their family names appeared in stained glass and commemorative brasses. These churches proclaimed a new social reality. Wealth derived from trade now commanded respect once reserved for landed aristocracy. The guilds regulated this prosperity jealously. In York, the merchants' adventurers enforced standards, inspected cloth, and controlled who could trade. Their hall, built in 1357, served as courthouse, warehouse, and meeting place. Here merchant princes decided which young apprentices might rise and which upstarts would be excluded from lucrative markets. Guild membership became hereditary, creating commercial dynasties as enduring as noble houses. Yorkshire's wool economy reshaped international politics. When Edward III needed funds for his French wars in 1337, he taxed wool exports mercilessly. Yorkshire's merchants grumbled but paid, their contributions financing the 100 Years' War. When that same king sought commercial leverage against Flemish cities, he manipulated wool supply, demonstrating that Yorkshire fleeces had become weapons of economic warfare. By 1400, Yorkshire's transformation was complete. The devastated landscape William had created 3 centuries earlier had become England's wealthiest region outside London. Sheep grazed where Vikings once farmed. Stone churches replaced wooden halls. And Yorkshire wool, processed by Yorkshire hands, clothed European backs from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean. But prosperity attracted attention, and with attention came demands. The Tudor monarchs approaching on history's horizon would look at Yorkshire's wealth with acquisitive eyes, setting the stage for confrontations that would shake the realm. The succession crisis that erupted in 1455 found Yorkshire uniquely positioned. Richard Plantagenet, 3rd Duke of York, possessed more than a title connecting him to the county. His ancestral seat at Sandal Castle near Wakefield anchored a network of northern estates, retainers, and loyalties that made Yorkshire his natural power base. When he challenged Henry VI's feeble rule, the county's nobility rallied to their duke. Richard's claim combined legitimacy with capability. Descended from Edward III through both paternal and maternal lines, he argued his bloodline superior to the Lancastrian kings. More importantly, while Henry suffered debilitating mental collapses, Richard governed effectively as Lord Protector. Yorkshire's gentry, accustomed to strong leadership since Norman times, recognized competence when they saw it. The first battle at St. Albans in 1455 ended quickly, but it marked a threshold. Englishmen had killed Englishmen in dynastic conflict. The fragile peace that followed collapsed 5 years later when Richard marched south from Yorkshire with fresh demands. He wanted the throne itself, claiming inheritance through superior descent. Parliament hesitated, then compromised. Henry would reign, but Richard would inherit. Queen Margaret of Anjou refused to accept her son's disinheritance. She raised a Lancastrian army and marched north, forcing Richard back to Yorkshire for Christmas 1460. On December 30th, Lancastrian forces surrounded Sandal Castle. Richard, commanding perhaps 5,000 men against twice that number, made a fatal decision. He abandoned his defensible position and marched out to engage. The Battle of Wakefield lasted barely an hour. Lancastrian forces crushed the Yorkist army in the fields below Sandal. Richard died fighting, as did his 17-year-old son Edmund. Their bodies were decapitated, their heads mounted on spikes above York's Micklegate bar. Richard wore a paper crown in mockery of his ambitions. The Duke of York had gambled everything on Yorkshire loyalty and lost. But defeat galvanized support. Richard's eldest son, now Edward, Earl of March, commanded broader allegiance than his father ever managed. Tall, charismatic, and militarily gifted, the 18-year-old rallied Yorkshire's nobility for revenge. He marched north in March 1461 with an army exceeding 30,000 men, meeting an equally massive Lancastrian force on a snowy plateau between the villages of Towton and Saxton. Palm Sunday, March 29, 1461. The battle began at dawn in a blizzard, snow driving into Lancastrian faces. Yorkist archers exploited the wind, their arrows reaching enemy lines while Lancastrian shafts fell short. What began as tactical advantage became slaughter. Men fought for 10 hours in conditions turning the field to freezing mud. When Lancastrian lines finally broke, retreat became rout. Yorkist cavalry pursued fleeing soldiers for miles, cutting them down along Towton's narrow lanes and drowning them in the swollen Cockbeck. Contemporary chronicles claimed 28,000 dead, likely exaggerated but indicating unprecedented carnage. Bodies choked the beck for days. Mass graves around Towton still yield skeletal evidence of catastrophic trauma. This wasn't chivalric combat but industrial-scale killing, neighbor against neighbor across frozen Yorkshire earth. England's nobility suffered generational losses. Edward's victory secured the crown. He entered York in triumph, removing his father's head from Micklegate Bar and replacing it with Lancastrian nobles' remains. Yorkshire had delivered the throne to the House of York. Yet Yorkist dominance proved fragile. When Edward's brother Richard seized power in 1483, suspicions of murder and usurpation tainted Yorkshire's royal house. 2 years later, Henry Tudor landed in Wales with French mercenaries. Richard marched south from Yorkshire one final time, dying at Bosworth Field in 1485, England's last king killed in battle. The Yorkist cause flickered briefly afterward. Lambert Simnel's rebellion in 1487 drew Yorkshire support but collapsed at Stoke Field. The White Rose had withered. Yorkshire's decades of dynastic warfare had produced crowns and corp. Henry VIII's break with Rome reached Yorkshire in 1536 like a hammer blow to the soul. For centuries, monasteries had defined the county's spiritual and economic landscape. Fountains Abbey, Revox, Kirkstall. These weren't merely religious houses but vast enterprises employing thousands, providing charity to the poor, education to the bright, and stability to communities across the Dales. Now, Thomas Cromwell's commissioners arrived with orders to dissolve them all, seizing their wealth for the crown. The smaller monasteries fell first. Commissioners inventoried plate, sold lead from roofs, turned monks into the roads. Locals watched institutions older than memory dismantled within weeks. The financial calculations meant nothing to Yorkshire farmers who depended on monastic grain stores during lean years, or to widows receiving abbey alms, or to families whose sons found purpose in religious life rather than manual labor. October 1536. Rebellion ignited in Lincolnshire, then spread north like wildfire across the Humber. Yorkshire exploded. At Beverley, Commons seized the town. At York, citizens demanded restoration of dissolved houses. But the movement needed organization, leadership, and a face. It found all three in Robert Askey. A lawyer from Autun, educated at Gray's Inn, Askey possessed neither noble blood nor military reputation. Yet, when he addressed crowds gathering at York, something remarkable happened. This articulate gentleman transformed scattered protests into purposeful movement. He called it the Pilgrimage of Grace, framing rebellion as religious devotion. Pilgrims, not rebels. Their banner displayed the 5 wounds of Christ. Their oath pledged loyalty to king and commonwealth while demanding restoration of the church and removal of heretical advisors like Cromwell. The numbers astounded everyone. 40,000 men assembled under Askey's leadership by mid-October, the largest force seen in Yorkshire since Towton. Lords who had fought for tutors at Bosworth now joined, understanding this touched something deeper than dynastic politics. The Duke of Norfolk, commanding royal forces, found himself outnumbered 5-1 at Doncaster. He had perhaps 8,000 troops facing Askey's multitude. But Askey was no military commander seeking battle. He wanted negotiation, reform, restoration of traditional faith. When Norfolk requested parley, promising to carry pilgrim grievances to the king, Askey agreed. Henry's response came swiftly: a general pardon, promises to consider their demands, and assurances that a parliament would meet at York to address northern concerns. The Pilgrims disbanded peacefully in December 1536, trusting royal word. Robert Askey traveled to London for Christmas, received by Henry with apparent warmth and granted a silk jacket. Everything seemed resolved. It was theater. Henry had bought time to reinforce northern garrisons and never intended honoring promises made under duress. When minor disturbances erupted in Cumberland and Westmoreland in January 1537, the king declared the pardon void. Norfolk returned north with orders ending all pretense of mercy. The reprisals were surgical and savage. Robert Askey was arrested at Pontefract Castle, tried for treason, and hanged in chains from York's Clifford's Tower, his body left to rot as public warning. Lords who had joined the pilgrimage faced execution. The abbot of Fountains was hanged at his own abbey gates. Across Yorkshire, over 200 leaders died, their estates forfeit to the crown. The dissolution continued with renewed vigor. By 1540, every major monastery in Yorkshire stood empty, their stones sold for building material, their libraries scattered or burned, their communities dissolved. Fountains, revolts, Jorviks. Architectural glories that had stood for 4 centuries became haunted ruins within a decade. Yorkshire's greatest rebellion had failed completely. The old faith's infrastructure lay shattered, noble families impoverished or destroyed, and royal power more absolute than ever. Yet Henry's victory came at a cost. Yorkshire would remember this betrayal for generations. The executions of 1537 cast a long shadow, but they failed to extinguish what they intended to destroy. While Henry's men tore down abbey walls and melted church plate, the old Catholic faith simply went underground. Across Yorkshire's remote dales and valleys, families maintained their beliefs in secret, celebrating Mass in hidden chambers and attic chapels. These recusants, as they became known, paid heavy fines for refusing to attend Protestant services, yet persisted generation after generation. Priest holes appeared in manor houses throughout the county. At Harewood, at Ripley, at dozens of gentry estates, craftsmen constructed ingenious hiding places behind fireplaces and beneath staircases where illegal Catholic priests could vanish during raids. The Vavasor family of Haslewood kept the faith despite crushing financial penalties. So did the Gascoignes, the Fairfaxes of Gilling, and countless yeoman farmers whose names survive only in recusancy court records. But if the Reformation shattered Yorkshire's old religious order, it also created opportunity. The dissolution of monasteries had redistributed an enormous amount of land and wealth. A new class emerged to claim it: the gentry. These weren't ancient nobles with titles stretching back centuries, but ambitious lawyers, successful merchants, and shrewd administrators who purchased monastic estates at bargain prices or received them as royal rewards. The Wentworths built their fortune this way, transforming themselves from modest landowners into one of Yorkshire's most powerful families. So did the Lothers, the Boyntons, and dozens of others. They enclosed former abbey lands, invested in agricultural improvements, and began to assert political influence that would eventually challenge even the crown itself. Meanwhile, Yorkshire's economy was shifting westward. The West Riding's cloth trade, already significant during medieval times, began its explosive growth. Halifax, Leeds, and Wakefield transformed from market towns into manufacturing centers. Water-powered fulling mills lined every suitable stream, processing woolen cloth that found markets across Europe. Merchants grew wealthy, building impressive houses in Sowerby and Heptonstall. This wasn't the old feudal economy of land and rents. This was commerce, enterprise, trade. The Stuart succession in 1603 brought new complications. James I and his son Charles I demanded taxes without parliamentary approval, appointed unpopular ministers, and seemed disturbingly sympathetic to Catholic influences. Yorkshire's gentry, many now sitting in Parliament, grew increasingly resistant. They had wealth, education, and a fierce sense of independence inherited from centuries of border warfare and royal neglect. Sir Thomas Wentworth, later Earl of Strafford, embodied these contradictions perfectly. A Yorkshire gentleman who became Charles's most powerful minister, he understood northern independence yet served absolutist monarchy. His execution in 1641 would symbolize the final collapse of understanding between crown and county. By 1640, tensions had reached breaking point. Yorkshire had survived religious upheaval and economic transformation. Now it faced something worse: civil war between king and parliament. The county that had once united against royal dissolution would soon tear itself apart, choosing sides. When King Charles I arrived at Hull's gates on April 23, 1642, expecting the city to open for him, Governor Sir John Hotham faced an impossible choice. The monarch stood outside demanding entry to England's largest arsenal north of London. Hotham refused. The gates stayed shut. In that single moment, Yorkshire became ground zero for civil war. The county fractured along fault lines that made little geographic sense. Hull declared for Parliament. So did Bradford and Leeds, those booming cloth towns where Puritan merchants valued parliamentary taxation rights more than divine kingship. Halifax followed suit, its woolen manufacturers seeing their futures tied to parliamentary trade policies rather than royal monopolies. Yet just 20 miles away, ancient York remained stubbornly royalist, its cathedral clergy and old gentry families rallying to Charles. The Clifford family at Skipton Castle declared for the king. So did most landed aristocrats, men whose titles and estates depended on royal favor. But their own younger sons sometimes chose Parliament. Brother fought brother. The Fairfax family split down the middle. Sir Thomas Fairfax led parliamentary armies while his relatives commanded royalist troops. Village congregations divided. Business partnerships dissolved. Yorkshire was cannibalizing itself. For 2 years, skirmishes bloodied the county. Leeds changed hands 3 times. Bradford endured a brutal siege in 1643, its Puritan defenders holding out against royalist forces while plague ravaged the streets. Yet the real prize remained York. By April 1644, parliamentary armies under Lord Fairfax had surrounded the city. Inside, William Cavendish, Marquess of Newcastle, commanded 5,000 royalist troops growing hungrier by the day. Prince Rupert marched north with relief forces. The parliamentary besiegers withdrew to Marston Moor, 7 miles west of York, where they were joined by Scottish Covenanter armies. On July 2, 1644, as evening approached, 20,000 royalists faced 28,000 parliamentary and Scottish troops across open farmland. What followed became the largest battle ever fought on English soil. For 3 hours, cavalry charged through ripening wheat fields while musketeers exchanged volleys that turned summer air acrid with gunpowder smoke. Prince Rupert's forces initially drove back parliamentary cavalry, but Oliver Cromwell's disciplined Ironsides rallied and counterattacked. By nightfall, 4,000 men lay dead or dying among the crops. The Royalist army had ceased to exist as an effective force. York surrendered within days. Newcastle fled to the continent. The north belonged to Parliament, though fighting would sputter on for years. Bradford's defenders, who had eaten rats during their siege, now celebrated as local heroes. In Hull, merchants who had risked everything by closing the gates against their king now controlled Yorkshire's primary port. The war's aftermath proved almost as devastating as the conflict itself. Yorkshire's economy, disrupted by years of requisitions and fighting, struggled to recover. Churches bore scars from iconoclastic soldiers who had smashed stained glass and defaced monuments. Country houses showed damage from occupation by both armies. Then came Oliver Cromwell's Republic, replacing king with Lord Protector, but solving little. Yorkshire's royalists paid crushing fines for their loyalty. Its parliamentarians discovered that military dictatorship felt uncomfortably similar to the royal tyranny they had fought against. The county that had sparked civil war by shutting its gates now waited, exhausted and cynical, wondering what would emerge from the chaos it had helped create. The smoke that cleared from Marston Moor revealed a Yorkshire forever changed. Yet the real revolution came not from politics, but from wool. By 1700, the county's ancient cloth trade was transforming into something unprecedented. A manufacturing powerhouse that would reshape the world. Walk through any West Riding village in the early 18th century and you would find the domestic system at its zenith. In cramped cottages, entire families worked wool from dawn until candlelight. The father operated a hand loom, his shuttle clacking rhythmically as he wove thread into cloth. His wife spun raw wool into yarn on her spinning wheel, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Even children 5 years old carded wool, combing fibers straight with wire brushes until their small hands ached. These cottage weavers were not employees but independent craftsmen. A clothier would deliver raw wool to their doors, return weeks later to collect finished fabric, then pay them by the piece. The system spread work across thousands of homes, turning entire valleys into diffuse factories where the clatter of looms provided a constant soundtrack to village life. Leeds emerged as the commercial heart of this scattered empire. Every Tuesday and Saturday, the Briggate cloth market transformed into controlled chaos. Merchants spread their pieces across stone counters while buyers scrutinized the weave, haggling over quality and price. By 1720, Leeds handled more woolen cloth than any other English town. Dutch buyers walked these markets. So did merchants from London, Hamburg, even the Levant. Yorkshire wool, once destined for local use, now clothed half the known world. But the domestic system carried inherent limits. A weaver could only work so many hours. A single spinning wheel could only produce so much thread. Water power, however, knew no such constraints. Along Yorkshire's countless streams, innovative minds began harnessing the relentless energy of flowing water. John Lumby's silk mill in Derby, completed in 1721, provided the template. Yorkshire entrepreneurs noticed. By mid-century, water-powered mills appeared along the Ayr, the Calder, the Worth. These early mills were crude affairs, often just spinning jennies driven by wooden water wheels, but they represented something profound, machines replacing human muscle. The county's rivers had powered corn mills for centuries. Now they would power industry. Mill owners built their factories in remote valleys where streams ran fast and land came cheap. Villages like Calverley and Addingham suddenly found themselves industrial sites, their pastoral quiet shattered by the splash of water wheels and the whir of machinery. Moving all this raw wool and finished cloth required better transport than muddy packhorse trails. The solution arrived in 1799 when the Leeds and Liverpool Canal began construction, though it would take decades to complete. The Ayr and Calder navigation opened sections throughout the 1720s, allowing barges to carry Yorkshire cloth toward the coast. These canals did more than move goods. They represented capital investment on a scale Yorkshire had never seen, transforming isolated communities into nodes in an emerging network of industrial commerce. The cottage weavers still worked their hand looms, unaware that their world stood on the edge of obliteration. Steam power was coming, and with it, a transformation that would make civil war seem like a minor disturbance. The roar came first. Not the gentle splash of water wheels, but the thunderous hiss of steam engines, mechanical beasts that needed neither river nor rest. When Richard Arkwright's mill rose at Cromford in 1771, Yorkshire entrepreneurs recognized the future. Within 2 decades, steam-powered factories towered over Leeds, Bradford, and Halifax, their brick chimneys vomiting black smoke that turned noon into twilight. The scale defied comprehension. Where a cottage weaver might produce 20 yards of cloth weekly, a single steam-powered mill could process thousands. Marshall's flax mill in Leeds, completed in 1840, employed over 2,000 workers under one roof. The building stretched longer than Leeds Parish Church, its engine room housing beam engines as tall as houses, pistons rising and falling with mechanical precision that mocked human limitation. This concentration of production demanded vast numbers of workers. They came from everywhere. Displaced agricultural laborers trudged in from the Yorkshire countryside, their farms consolidated by enclosure acts that transformed common land into private estates. Irish families fled famine, crossing the sea with nothing but desperation. Entire villages emptied as people chased factory wages that, however meager, exceeded what the land could provide. The factories devoured them all. Children as young as 6 years old worked 13-hour shifts, their small fingers perfect for threading broken yarns beneath moving machinery. Factory inspectors later documented children so exhausted they fell asleep standing at their stations, only to be beaten awake by overseers wielding leather straps. In 1833, one Bradford mill employed 300 children but only 50 adults. The machines cared nothing for fingers or limbs. Unguarded gears crushed hands. Flying shuttles blinded eyes. Workers who grew drowsy after 12 hours of repetitive labor stumbled into belts and were pulled into machinery, their screams lost beneath the din. Factory owners paid compensation for deaths, typically £5, less than the cost of replacing a steam engine part. These conditions bred resistance. When manufacturers introduced automated looms that could do the work of several skilled weavers, the craftsmen struck back. Beginning in 1811, groups calling themselves Luddites attacked factories across the West Riding, smashing the new machinery with hammers and axes. At Rawfold's Mill near Halifax in 1812, armed Luddites attacked at midnight, exchanging gunfire with defenders. 2 attackers died. The army hanged 17 Luddites at York that year, their bodies displayed as warnings. But the machines could not be stopped. By 1830, Bradford had transformed from a market town of 13,000 souls into an industrial city approaching 90,000. Its skyline dominated by mill chimneys that contemporaries called the Forest of Bradford. The air itself became toxic, thick with coal smoke and the chemical stench from dye works. Respiratory diseases ravaged working families crowded into back-to-back housing where sunlight never reached and sewage ran through open channels. Yet, from this suffering emerged something powerful: collective action. Mill workers formed combinations, illegal unions that demanded shorter hours and safer conditions. Reformers like Richard Oastler, himself from a factory-owning family, crusaded against child labor with evangelical fury. He published letters describing 10-year-olds working 16-hour days, calling Yorkshire's mills infant slavery worse than anything in the plantations. Parliament eventually noticed. The Factory Act of 1833 forbade employing children under 9 and limited those under 13 to 9-hour days. It was inadequate, riddled with loopholes, easily evaded. But it represented recognition that industrial capitalism could not operate entirely without restraint, that even in pursuit of profit, some limits must exist. By 1850, Yorkshire produced more worsted cloth than the rest of Britain combined. Fortunes accumulated in Bradford, Leeds, and Halifax, building mansions and endowing chapels. The county had become the workshop not just of England, but of the world, its goods shipped to every continent. The cost, measured in broken bodies and shortened lives, would fuel decades of social conflict. Yet, even as Yorkshire's workers organized and agitated, another revolution approached. Railways were coming, and they would bind this industrial landscape into something unprecedented. The solution arrived in 1856, not through gradual refinement, but sudden revolution. Henry Bessemer stood before the British Association in Cheltenham and described a process that seemed impossible, converting molten pig iron into steel in mere minutes rather than days. His pear-shaped converter, tilted to pour in iron and blasted with air to burn away impurities, could produce 5 tons of steel in 20 minutes. What had been a precious metal, laboriously crafted in small batches, would become commonplace. Sheffield recognized opportunity instantly. The town had forged blades since medieval times, its cutlers renowned across Europe for razors, scissors, and swords. But Bessemer steel changed everything. Within 5 years, Sheffield steelmakers had erected massive converters along the Don Valley, their nighttime glow visible for miles as molten metal poured like liquid fire. The Bessemer process required skill and precision, qualities Sheffield possessed in abundance. One miscalculation in timing or temperature and the entire batch became worthless slag. The applications multiplied beyond anyone's imagination. Sheffield steel formed railway tracks that crisscrossed continents. It became ships' hulls, bridge girders, factory machines. When nations went to war, they armed themselves with Sheffield steel. Cannon barrels, rifle parts, armor plating. By 1870, Sheffield produced more steel than the rest of Britain combined, its population swelling past 200,000 as workers flooded in from across Yorkshire and beyond. Yet Sheffield's triumph emerged from foundations laid deep underground. South Yorkshire sat atop coal seams of extraordinary thickness and quality, some veins stretching 20 feet deep of pure black fuel. Without this coal, no furnaces could burn hot enough for steel production. The Bessemer process consumed staggering quantities, each ton of steel requiring several tons of coal. The coal came forth in ever-increasing torrents. At Barnsley, Doncaster, and Rotherham, mine shafts plunged hundreds of feet into the earth. Where Yorkshire had produced 1 million tons of coal in 1850, it extracted 5 million tons by 1870, 10 million by 1885. Entire villages existed solely to feed the mines: Grimmathorpe, Goldthorpe, Askern, Rossington. These communities appeared almost overnight, rows of identical brick houses built by mine owners to house their workforce. Railways bound this industrial empire together. The Midland Railway drove lines across the Pennines, its viaducts spanning valleys on stone arches 60 feet high. Branch lines snaked to every colliery, every steelworks. Coal trucks rumbled south toward London. Steel beams rolled toward Liverpool's docks. Journey times that once required days shrank to hours. A Sheffield manufacturer could breakfast in his home, conduct business in London, and return the same evening. The human cost remained brutal. Mining deaths occurred with grim regularity. Roof collapses, gas explosions, flooding. In 1866, an explosion at Oaks Colliery near Barnsley killed 361 men and boys, many dying not from the initial blast but from toxic gases as they attempted rescue. Entire streets wore mourning, yet the mines reopened within weeks. Coal production could not stop. These communities developed fierce identities. Mining families, working impossible hours in dangerous conditions, forged bonds of mutual dependence. They established cooperatives, brass bands, working men's clubs. Their chapels rang with hymns sung by voices strengthened in the pits. When disputes arose over wages or safety, entire villages struck together, their solidarity forged in shared suffering. By 1890, Yorkshire had become industrial civilization's beating heart, its steel arming empires and its coal powering the modern world. But storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and the workers who built this empire were learning to demand their share of its profits. While factory owners amassed fortunes, some developed consciences. Titus Salt, a Bradford wool merchant who had grown wealthy beyond measure, looked upon his smoke-choked city and made an extraordinary decision. In 1851, he purchased land along the River Aire and began constructing something unprecedented, an entire model village for his workers. Saltaire rose between 1851 and 1872, a planned community of clean streets, solid houses, schools, hospitals, and parks. Salt's massive mill employed 3,000 workers who lived in homes with running water and proper sanitation, luxuries unknown in Bradford's festering slums. No public houses were permitted. Salt believed drink destroyed working families. The village included almshouses for the elderly, bathhouses, a library, and concert hall. Critics called it paternalistic control. Workers called it paradise compared to urban squalor. The movement spread. Joseph Rowntree built similar housing in York for his chocolate factory workers. These model villages represented a new philosophy. Healthy workers proved more productive, and perhaps manufacturers bore responsibility for those who enriched them. Yet, thousands more labored in mills and mines with no such beneficence, their lives measured in exhaustion and early death. Reform movements gathered force across Yorkshire's industrial cities. In Bradford, municipal socialism transformed local government. Rather than leaving essential services to private profit, the corporation took direct control. Bradford purchased its gasworks in 1870, providing cheaper fuel for heating and lighting. The tramway system followed, then water supply. Socialist councillors argued that basic necessities should serve people, not shareholders. Leeds pursued similar policies, building public baths, parks, and the first municipal museum outside London. Education became a battleground. The 1870 Education Act mandated elementary schooling, but Yorkshire's mill owners resisted, reluctant to lose child workers. Nevertheless, board schools rose in working-class districts, severe brick buildings where children learned reading, arithmetic, and scripture. For the first time, working-class boys and girls gained basic literacy, tools that would empower future generations to demand more. Trade unions, suppressed and persecuted for decades, finally achieved legal recognition. Yorkshire's textile workers, miners, and engineers formed powerful organizations. The Yorkshire Miners' Association, founded in 1881, united pitmen across the coalfield. When owners cut wages or refused safety improvements, strikes paralyzed entire industries. These battles proved bitter and often violent, with troops deployed to break picket lines. Yet slowly, incrementally, unions won concessions: shorter hours, better pay, compensation for injuries. Amidst industrialization's thunder, Yorkshire discovered its literary voice. The Bronte sisters, daughters of a Haworth parson, transformed their isolated moorland village into settings for novels that scandalized and captivated Victorian Britain. Charlotte's Jane Eyre, Emily's Wuthering Heights, and Anne's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall emerged from the windswept landscapes they knew intimately. Emily particularly captured Yorkshire's wild character, her Heathcliff embodying the moor's savage beauty and cruelty. The sisters wrote under masculine pseudonyms, knowing female authors faced dismissal, yet their work endured, establishing Yorkshire's landscape as literary territory. By 1900, Yorkshire's cities teemed with over 2 million souls. Electric trams replaced horse-drawn omnibuses. Telephones connected businesses. Moving pictures flickered in music halls. The county had transformed utterly from the rural landscape of a century prior, becoming an industrial titan whose products reached every continent. Yet, beneath prosperity's surface, tension simmered. Workers possessed new power through unions and the vote, extended to working men in 1867 and 1884. They had tasted reform and wanted more. As a new century dawned, Yorkshire's working class would no longer accept crumbs from their masters' tables. Then came August 1914, and everything changed. The declaration of war erupted across Yorkshire like wildfire. In Leeds, Sheffield, Bradford, and Hull, young men surged toward recruitment offices, queuing for hours to enlist. Many feared the war would end before they saw action. How wrong they were. The conflict would consume a generation and shatter Yorkshire's industrial confidence forever. Yorkshire raised an extraordinary innovation: the PALS battalions. Lord Kitchener's call for volunteers inspired local authorities to recruit entire units from single communities. Friends could serve together, march together, fight together. The idea spread like contagion across the county. Bradford raised 2 battalions, the Bradford PALS, drawn from the city's mills and engineering works. Sheffield formed the Sheffield City Battalion from its steelworkers. Leeds, Hull, and Barnsley each raised their own. Young clerks enlisted alongside factory hands, united by hometown pride and naive enthusiasm. The Leeds PALs trained on Colsterdale Moor, transforming shopkeepers and tram conductors into soldiers. They drilled with wooden rifles because real weapons were scarce. Photographs show them grinning, confident, barely out of boyhood. Their families watched them depart for France in early 1916, bands playing, crowds cheering. Most would never return. The 1st of July, 1916. The Somme offensive began at 7:30 that morning. British commanders promised the preliminary bombardment would obliterate German defenses. It failed catastrophically. When whistles blew and men climbed from trenches, German machine guns emerged from deep dugouts and opened fire. Yorkshire battalions walked into annihilation. The Leeds Pals advanced towards Sayre. Within minutes, 24 officers and 750 men fell dead or wounded. The Bradford Pals attacked at Sayre simultaneously, suffering similarly devastating casualties. The Sheffield City Battalion lost over 500 men in a single morning. The Barnsley Pals were virtually destroyed. Entire streets in Yorkshire towns lost their young men in those terrible hours. Families who had celebrated together now mourned together. The war devoured Yorkshire's sons for 4 more years. Casualty lists filled newspaper columns. Nearly every family knew grief. Memorial services became commonplace, then routine, then numbing. Behind the lines, Yorkshire transformed again. With men at the front, women flooded into factories. They operated lathes in Sheffield's steel mills, assembled shells in Leeds munitions plants, drove trams through Bradford streets. Traditional gender barriers collapsed from necessity. Women discovered capabilities society had denied them, earning wages that brought unprecedented independence. Their contributions proved indispensable, though many men resented this intrusion into masculine domains. The armistice arrived in November 1918. Church bells rang across Yorkshire for the first time in 4 years. Yet celebration felt hollow. The dead numbered over 90,000 Yorkshire men. Every town erected war memorials listing names that seemed endless. The Leeds cenotaph, unveiled in 1922, became a pilgrimage site for grieving families. Victory's aftermath brought bitter disappointment. Promised homes fit for heroes never materialized. Returning soldiers found unemployment and poverty. Yorkshire's industries, bloated by wartime production, contracted sharply. Shipyards closed. Steel orders collapsed. Coal demand plummeted. The economy staggered toward catastrophe, and working families who had sacrificed everything wondered what, precisely, they had won. The stock market crash of October 1929 rippled across the Atlantic like a tidal wave, smashing into Yorkshire's already fragile economy with devastating force. Within months, the unemployment that had lingered since the Great War became catastrophic. Sheffield's steelworks laid off thousands. Bradford's textile mills shuttered production lines. Coal mines across the West Riding cut shifts, then closed seams, then dismissed entire workforces. By 1932, nearly 1 in 4 Yorkshire workers stood idle, their families sliding toward destitution. In Jarrow, just north of Yorkshire's border, unemployed men organized a march to London in October 1936. Yorkshire's towns watched and learned. Hunger marches became a grim feature of Depression-era life. Men walked with placards demanding work, not charity. Women organized soup kitchens in church halls. Children went to school hungry, their shoes stuffed with cardboard to cover holes. War arrived again in September 1939, bringing ironically perverse relief. Factories reopened almost overnight. Sheffield's steel furnaces roared back to life, forging tank armor and artillery shells. Leeds engineering works operated around the clock. Unemployment vanished as production soared to meet military demand. Yorkshire's industrial muscle, idle and wasting through the Depression, suddenly became vital to national survival. German bombers arrived on the night of December 12, 1940. Sheffield's steel mills blazed like beacons, guiding enemy aircraft through the darkness. The Luftwaffe dropped incendiary bombs that ignited firestorms across the city center. High explosives followed, collapsing buildings and trapping families in cellars. For 2 consecutive nights, Sheffield burned. 660 people died. 40,000 buildings suffered damage. The city's medieval core, the Castle Market, the Marples Hotel, all reduced to rubble and ash. Hull endured worse. Its strategic port made it a priority target. German raids pounded the city repeatedly through 1940, 41, and 42. Nearly 1,200 civilians perished. 95% of buildings sustained some damage, making Hull Britain's most heavily bombed city relative to its size. Yet the docks kept functioning, supplies kept flowing, and Yorkshire grit refused to break. Victory in May 1945 brought transformation more profound than war itself. The Labour landslide of July that year promised radical change, and Yorkshire watched intently as government reshaped the nation. Coal mines, nationalized on January 1, 1947, passed from private owners into state control. Yorkshire miners, exploited for generations, now worked for the National Coal Board. Steel followed suit in 1951, Sheffield's foundries joining a nationalized industry. The welfare state emerged from war's ashes. The National Health Service, launched in July 1948, brought free medical care to families who had feared doctors' bills for generations. Council estates sprouted across Yorkshire's towns, replacing Victorian slums with modern housing featuring indoor toilets, running hot water, and gardens. The Quarry Hill flats in Leeds, though controversial, symbolized ambition for better living. Sheffield demolished its worst slums, rehousing thousands in new developments. Yorkshire entered the 1960s cautiously optimistic. Depression and war had tested the county's resilience to breaking point. Now, perhaps, prosperity might finally arrive. The 1960s brought warning signs that few in Yorkshire wanted to see. Coal, the black gold that had powered the county for generations, faced an existential threat. North Sea gas discoveries and cheap imported oil offered cleaner, easier alternatives. Government ministers began muttering about uneconomic pits. In 1968, the National Coal Board announced the first wave of closures. Small mines shut across the West Riding. Communities built entirely around single pit heads watched their reason for existence disappear. By 1980, Yorkshire still extracted 30 million tons annually from nearly 60 pits. But the writing blazed across the wall. The National Union of Mine Workers, battle-hardened from decades of struggle, prepared for confrontation. Their president, Arthur Scale from Barnsley, understood that compromise meant slow death. Yorkshire's miners, traditionally the union's most militant branch, stood ready. Margaret Thatcher, elected Prime Minister in May 1979, saw the confrontation differently. She remembered the 1974 miners' strike that had toppled Edward Heath's government. She remembered power cuts, 3-day weeks, and union power humiliating Westminster. She stockpiled coal at power stations. She ensured police forces could mobilize across regions. She waited. The spark came in March 1984. The coal board announced 20 pit closures, threatening 20,000 jobs. Yorkshire miners walked out immediately without a national ballot. Nottinghamshire miners kept working, splitting the union fatally. But in Yorkshire's coalfields, the Doncaster coalfield, South Yorkshire's pits, Selby's new super pits, solidarity held firm. Picket lines formed at dawn. What followed became the most bitter industrial dispute in modern British history. Yorkshire's mining communities transformed into fortified camps. Women organized soup kitchens knowing wages had stopped. Children collected coal from slag heaps for winter heating. Villages split between those who struck and those who worked, friendships shattered, families divided. The police arrived in numbers Yorkshire had never seen. Metropolitan police officers, drafted from London, established roadblocks on motorways leading to coalfields. They stopped cars, turned back miners trying to join pickets elsewhere, treated British citizens like enemy combatants. The term flying pickets entered the vocabulary, as did scab hurled at working miners passing through hostile lines. Orgreave coking plant near Rotherham became the flashpoint. On June 18, 1984, 6,000 pickets faced an equal number of police in full riot gear, some mounted on horseback. Television cameras captured what happened next. Police charged, batons swinging, horses driving into crowds. Miners threw stones, fought back desperately, then retreated under sustained assault. 100 pickets were arrested. Dozens required hospital treatment. The images shocked the nation. Prosecutions followed. The state charged picketers with riot, a charge carrying life imprisonment. All cases eventually collapsed, but the message landed brutally clear. This was war, and the government intended total victory. Winter 1984 brought desperation. Families surviving on handouts faced Christmas without money for presents or food. Support groups from across Britain sent parcels, donations, solidarity that kept hope flickering. But hunger gnawed. Poverty deepened. Marriages crumbled under financial strain. By March 1985, exactly 1 year after the strike began, defeat loomed inevitable. Without Nottinghamshire, without enough coal stockpiled to hurt the government, without public support eroded by violent picket line images, the new unaccepted reality. Miners marched back to work behind brass bands, heads high but hearts broken. The closures accelerated immediately. Pits that survived the strike died through the late 80s and 90s. Entire Yorkshire towns watched their economic foundations crumble. Grimethorpe, Goldthorpe, Rossington, Maltby, places where grandfathers, fathers, and sons had all worked underground, faced unemployment rates exceeding 50%. Social fabric disintegrated. Drug addiction soared. Young people fled, chasing opportunities elsewhere. By 1994, British coal privatized. By 2000, Yorkshire's deep mines had nearly vanished. Kellingly, the last deep pit, closed. As the 1990s dawned, Yorkshire confronted a landscape transformed beyond recognition. The pit wheels had stopped turning. The steelworks stood silent. The textile mills that once hummed day and night now housed luxury apartments or lay derelict. What could possibly replace the industries that had defined the county for 2 centuries? Leeds provided the first answer. The city's financial sector, modest in the coal and steel era, exploded with unexpected vigor. Banks, insurance companies, and legal firms established northern headquarters in gleaming towers along the River Aire. By 2000, Leeds employed over 30,000 people in financial services, becoming Britain's largest financial center outside London. The transformation stunned observers who remembered when Leeds meant engineering and textiles. Sheffield followed a different path. Unable to compete with cheap Asian steel, the city pivoted toward advanced manufacturing and digital industries. The universities, once training grounds for engineers and metallurgists, became incubators for technology startups. The wounds remained visible, vast brownfield sites where foundries once stood, but new industries emerged from the wreckage. Bradford struggled longer. The city's textile heritage left behind unemployment approaching 20% in some neighborhoods. Yet even Bradford found reinvention through education, media production, and its designation as UNESCO City of Film in 2009, celebrating its cinematic heritage from the world's first moving picture to modern Bollywood production. Tourism emerged as an unexpected savior. The very industrial heritage Yorkshire was desperate to escape became a magnet for visitors. The National Coal Mining Museum opened at Caffhouse Colliery in 1988, offering underground tours guided by former miners. Tourists descended into the darkness their grandfathers had fled, experiencing conditions that had shaped generations. The museum attracted hundreds of thousands annually, transforming tragedy into education. York reinvented itself as a heritage destination par excellence. The city that had been a railway hub became a living museum, its medieval streets and Viking artifacts drawing 3 million visitors yearly. The Jorvik Viking Center, opening in 1984, recreated 10th century Jorvik with such sensory detail that visitors could smell the fish markets and leather workshops of 1,000 years past. The Yorkshire Dales and North York Moors, protected as national parks, offered escape from urban chaos. Haworth drew literary pilgrims seeking the Bronte sisters' moorland inspiration. Whitby capitalized on Dracula connections and fishing village charm. The Harriet country around Thirsk attracted fans of the beloved veterinary books and television series. But Yorkshire's greatest achievement in these decades was maintaining its distinctive identity against homogenizing global forces. While other English regions saw their accents soften, their traditions fade, Yorkshire people clung fiercely to their heritage. Local dialect remained strong, particularly in rural areas. Children still learned the county's history with pride. The white rose symbol appeared everywhere, claiming territory, declaring belonging. The county's sporting culture reinforced this identity. Yorkshire cricket, despite professional struggles, remained a secular religion. Leeds United, Sheffield Wednesday, Sheffield United, Hull City, Bradford City, these football clubs commanded tribal loyalty that transcended mere sport. When Yorkshire hosted stages of the Tour de France in 2014, 3 million spectators lined the routes, the largest crowds in the race's history, painting roadways with white roses and displaying Yorkshire pride to a global audience. As the 21st century progressed, Yorkshire had become something remarkable, a post-industrial landscape that honored its past while building a service-based future, a region that welcomed the modern world without surrendering its soul. The coal and steel had gone, but Yorkshire remained defiantly, unmistakably, proudly itself. Yorkshire's 2,000 years of rebellion, resilience, and reinvention continue to shape England's future. Subscribe to discover more stories of the places that forged our world.